Dear student, in this lecture we are going to discuss electroplating. Electroplating is a process which is used to deposit a thin layer of matter on a bulk of another matter. Or in electroplating, a thin layer is taken off from one metal and it is deposited on another metal. So we can say that electroplating is a process. It is a process used to deposit a thin layer of one metal onto the another metal. So by electroplating process we can basically change physical properties of a bulk material, like we have achieved metals such as copper or zinc, and when we deposit a layer of a gold on a surface of a copper or zinc metal, then we get a low cost surface coated jewelry gold jewelry. So this means that in jewelry shop, when you see that the jewelry is low cost and it sounds like it is made up of gold, it's not made up of a gold, but it is surface plated by gold metal. The electroplating process is also known as plating. A device in which electroplating is performed is known as electroplating cell. Dear student, please keep in mind in electroplating cell there are usually take place two types of chemical reaction. One type of chemical reaction is known as oxidation reaction, and second type of chemical reaction is known as reduction reaction. Common use of electroplating is in jewelry, and electronic circuitings. So, dear student, in a simple word, if I define electroplating is a process in which we deposit a thin layer of one metal on a surface of a bulk of another metal. Or in electroplating process, we take one metal and deposit it on the surface of another metal. Due to deposition of that layer on the surface of another metal, we change the physical properties of that bulk metal. Most commonly use of electroplating is in jewelry industry. When you see that some jewelries are low cost, then like they are made, they sound like a gold, but usually they are electroplated. They composed of low cost metal like copper and zinc, but they are electroplated with costly metal like gold and. So the device in which electroplating is performed is known as electroplating cell. So now let us discuss about the electroplating. Let us discuss about the construction of electroplating cell and how an electroplating is performed in electroplating cell. This student, electroplating cell usually composed of a container, and that container usually consists of ionic solution. Here, the solution is copper sulfate. We are taking an example of electroplating of copper on zinc plate. So electroplating cell basically will consist of, in order to deposit copper on zinc plate, the electroplating cell will compose of a plate of a zinc and as well as plate of copper. The student, please keep in mind, it is not possible to take a copper directly and deposit it on the surface of a zinc because they are stable in a metal form in a solution. But in order to draw a copper on the surface of a zinc, we need to use an external power supply, which will basically force the copper ion to deposit on the surface of a zinc metal. The student, please keep in mind that the zinc is connected with cathode of the power source of battery and electroplating cell, whereas the copper is connected with of the anode of the battery. Okay, so as you know that battery has negative and as well as positive terminals. So the negative terminal of the battery basically uh, push the electrons, whereas positive terminal of battery, which act as a anode, basically it's pull electron toward itself. Okay, so electron E will be pulled by positive terminal of the battery, whereas negative terminal of the battery will push electron away from itself. Now zinc is in a bulk form, whereas copper is also in a bulk form. In order, as you know that according to rule of electrochemistry, when an atom is in a form of a neutral, then the atom is stable on the surface of a metal. So it will be a part of the metal. In order to deposit copper on zinc, we need first to ionize the copper, convert the copper into ion. When copper will be converted into ion, then the copper ions are soluble in solution. So copper Cu, if Cu ions, Cu2 plus ions are soluble in solution. So in order to convert a copper into Cu2 plus ions, we need to connect copper metal with anode or positive terminal of the battery. So the anode has the ability to pull the electrons. Okay, so anode will pull electron from copper. It will pull electron from copper, and due to this we will get copper 2 ion plus electrons. This is, if you see this equation is chemically not right because negative sign symbol is not used in a chemical reaction. So copper, this chemical reaction will be written as Cu2 plus 2 electrons. So the copper is basically losing two electrons, and due to this copper is converted into Cu2 ions, and the ions are basically soluble in a solution, so they will be a part of solution. Okay, student, please keep in mind that the solution which is used in electroplating cell is known as electrolyte. Electrolytes are usually electrolytic solution is basically composed of solutions of copper sulfate and water, or it may be a solution of sulfate and other types of sulfate and nitrate. But here we are basically using the electroplating of copper on the surface of zinc, so we will use copper sulfate solution. Okay, so this copper ion will go in the will go toward the copper sulfate solution, and they will become a part of a copper sulfate solution because copper is converted into an ionic form. Now dear student, as you know that the cathode which is connected with a negative terminal of a battery is connected with a zinc, and zinc act like a cathode. The cathode has the ability to push electron from the push electron away from itself. Okay, so the electron will move away from the zinc metal. So electron will come from the positive terminal and they will go toward the negative terminal of the battery, and through the zinc they will be incorporated into copper sulfate solution or electrolytic solution. So now, dear student, as you know that electrons will interact with the Cu2 ion, the copper ion. As you know that in order to deposit copper on the surface of zinc metal, we need to convert the copper into a neutral copper atom. So for this, the electron will interact with copper ions, and when the electrons interact with copper ions, copper ion will be converted into a neutral copper atom, and in this way they will be deposited on the surface of a zinc metal. Okay, so similarly in continuous fashion this types of interaction will take place and copper will be deposited on the surface of the zinc. So if I simply explain the electroplating cell consists of an electrolytic solution which is present in container. So the electrolytic solution is usually made up of ionic compound. We here are giving the example of copper deposition on the surface of zinc. We will use copper sulfate as electrolytic solution. So the positive terminal of the battery is connected with the copper metal. The negative terminal of the battery is connected with zinc metal. The copper metal in electroplating cell act like an anode, whereas the negative plate in the electrolytic cell of zinc acts like a cathode. Anode has ability to pull electron from zinc from the copper metal, whereas the cathode has an ability to push electrons. Okay, so the copper metal, the positive terminal of the battery will basically pull electron from copper plate, and copper will then be converted into copper ions, whereas the electrons will start to flow through the anode of the battery and they will go toward the cathode. So cathode has the ability to push electron, so electron will be pushed into a solution, And since you know that the copper, when the electrons are pulled by anode from the copper metal, copper is converted into ion, and it is a rule of electrochemistry that an atom, if it is in a form of a neutral, it will be a part of metal. But copper is converted into ion, then they are easily soluble into electrolytic solution. So the copper Cu2 will be shifted or will be transferred from copper plate in the form of ion into an electrolytic solution, whereas electrons are transferred into a solution through a zinc plate via cathode or via negative terminal of the battery. So the copper, in order to transfer copper on the surface of the copper metal plate, we need to make this copper ion neutral. So the electron from the zinc plate will interact with the copper ions, and when they interact with the copper ion will be converted into neutral copper atom, and the neutral copper atom can no longer be a part of electrolytic solution. It will be transferred on the surface of a zinc metal. So in this way, a copper will be coated on the surface of a zinc metal. So dear student, please keep in mind that in electroplating cell there are usually take place two kinds of chemical reactions. Dear student, please keep in mind that there are two types of chemical reactions take place in electroplating cell. One type of chemical reaction is known as oxidation reaction, and second type of chemical reaction is known as reduction reaction. Now let us discuss how oxidation and reduction reactions occur in uh, copper plated zinc metal in electroplating cell. So if we consider the copper side of the electroplating cell, copper is connected with a positive terminal of the battery or electroplating cell battery. So positive terminal of the battery mean that copper act like an anode. An anode has an ability to pull electrons away. Okay, so it will pull an electron. So this means that the copper atom will give electrons, and it will be converted into Cu2 plus ions on the copper side of electroplating cell. So as you know that chemicals, in chemical equation there is no used negative sign, so the chemical reaction will be copper into Cu2 plus ions plus 2 electrons. So reaction in which one metal electrons are given by a metal atom is known as oxidation reaction. So oxidation reaction will take place on the copper plate side of the electroplating cell. Whereas on the zinc plate side, the as you know that zinc is connected with negative terminal of the battery, and negative the role of the negative terminal of the battery is to give electrons, okay, or to push the electron from the zinc plate. So electrons are basically pushed into a solution through a zinc plate. So since you know that the solution has copper ions, so the copper ion Cu2 plus ion will gain 2 electrons, and they will be converted into Cu plus neutral atoms. So this reaction, a reaction in which an electron is gained by atom or ion, is known as reduction reaction. So these are two kinds of reaction: reduction reactions and oxidation reaction take place in electroplating cell, and due to these two reactions, the one metal is deposited on the other metal. So if I conclude electroplating is a process in which one metal is deposited onto another metal. The device in which electroplating is performed is known as electroplating cell. In electroplating cell, the two metals are basically inserted into a liquid solution, and liquid solution is electrolyte, and it is made up of ionic compound or polar compounds. So the positive and the metal the metal which are used to be coated and the metal which will be coated, both these metals are inserted into solution, but it is not possible to coat one metal onto the surface of another metal because both these metals are stable in a solution. In order to move one metal and deposit it on the surface of other metal, both the metals are connected with high potential source or with a battery. Negative terminal of the battery is connected with the metal on which the other metal will be coated, and whereas the positive terminal of the battery will be connected with the metal which will be coated on another metal. So the positive terminal of the battery will act, the metal which is connected with the positive terminal will act like an anode. An anode has an ability to pull electron toward itself. Due to this, the metal which we want to deposit will be ionized, and will be converted into ions, and ions are no longer part of the metal, they will become a part of the solution. Whereas the metal which is connected with the negative terminal of battery act as a cathode, it will give electron to the solution. So the ion from the depositing the metal will interact with the ion from the metal on which we want to do a deposition. So they will convert ion into a neutral atom, and in this way neutral atom, according to the rule of electrochemistry, are no longer part of solution, so they will go onto the surface of the metal on which we want to do a deposition. So in this way, a thin layer of a film will be deposited on the bulk material. This is all about the electroplating process. Thank you for watching this lecture.